To set up the game of Hanabi, first, set up the game area. To do this, first, place the 8 clock tokens with the clock side face up in the middle of the table. Next, locate the 4 fuse tokens. 3 of the tokens have fuses on them, and 1 has an explosion. Stack the tokens with the explosion on the bottom, followed by the shortest fuse, then the middle-sized fuse, and finally the token with the longest fuse on the top. The idea is to represent a fuse that is burning down until it ultimately explodes. Place the stack of fuse tokens next to the supply of clock tokens. Next, grab out the deck of cards. If you are new to the game, separate out the 10 multicolored suit cards and remove them from the game. These cards are only for advanced players, to make the game a bit more difficult. You can find ways to use these cards in the back of the game rulebook. After taking out the multicolored suit, 50 cards will remain in the deck. Shuffle these cards and place them face down in the middle of the playing area. After setting up the game area, each player will set up their individual player areas. To set up each player's area, first, deal each player their hand of cards. All cards will be dealt face down with the black and white side showing. Players must not look at their cards. In a 2 or 3 player game, deal 5 cards to each player. In a 4 or 5 player game, deal 4 cards to each player. Finally, each player will pick up their cards, but not look at them. They will hold them so that all other players can see their hand, but they can only see the backs of the cards. It should be noted that this is one of the most important aspects of the game, so players should take care not to play near reflective surfaces where a player may see their hand. After setting up the game area and each player's area, players are ready to start the game. The game of Hanabi is a cooperative game, so players are not playing against each other. They are playing against the game. The idea of the game is that players are firework manufacturers who had a mix-up of fireworks for a show that is about to happen. They must work together to build a fireworks show to try to stop the show from being a disaster. To start the game of Hanabi, the player wearing the most colorful clothing will become the start player, and play will continue in a clockwise direction. On each player's turn, they must take 1 action. There are 3 possible actions to take, and a player must take exactly 1 action during their turn, which means they cannot choose to skip taking an action. Let's take a look at each of the 3 possible actions to take during a player's turn. The first possible action a player can take is to give one player 1 piece of information about their hand of cards. Before taking this action, the player must remove 1 clock token from the supply in the middle of the playing area and return it to the game box. Therefore, if there are no more tokens left, a player cannot take this action and must choose one of the other 2 actions to take. If you are able to take this action, it will play out as follows. As mentioned, each player does not know what cards they hold in their own hand, because they are looking at the backs of the cards. But they know what cards each other player holds, because each other player is holding their cards facing all other players. So during your turn, you can choose to tell 1 piece of information about the cards another player is holding in their hand. The information will be about that player's hand of cards only, but since this is a cooperative game, all players will hear the information you gave them. Players should do their best to keep track of the information shared, so they don't repeat information already shared. Information you give another player about their cards can either be about 1 specific color of cards they are holding, or about 1 specific value on their cards. Whenever you tell a player something about their cards, you will not only say the information, you will also point to the card or cards you are talking about. Let's look into those 2 options for sharing information a bit further. When choosing to tell a player about 1 specific color, you could say, "You have 2 red cards" to the player, and point to the 2 cards that are red. Or you could tell this player they have 3 yellow cards. It should be noted that you must tell all of the cards of the color you have chosen to disclose. So if this player was going to use their action to tell this player about their green cards, they would have to tell them they have 2 green cards, and point to both of them. They couldn't just point out one of the green cards. The information must be complete. The other type of information a player can share is about the value on one other player's cards. For example, the current player could tell this player that they have 3 cards with the value of 3, and point to them. Or they could tell this player that they have 1 card with a value of 5, and point to it. Values work in the same way as colors, so a player must point to all cards of a certain value they choose. So this player could not choose to only point out one of the player's cards with a value of 4. They would have to tell the player that they have 2 cards with the value of 4, and point to both of them. Regardless of if you are sharing information about another player's card color or another player's card value, you must be able to point to a card. Therefore, you are not allowed to tell this player that they have no green cards, or to tell this player that they have no cards with a value of 3, because you have nothing specific to point to. After giving another player information about their cards, that player is allowed to rearrange their cards as necessary, to try to remember the information they were just given. They cannot, however, look at their cards while doing this. A second possible action the current player can take is to discard one of their hand cards. Before taking this action, a player must move 1 clock token that was placed in the game box during Action 1 back into the playing area for use again. Therefore, if there are no clock tokens currently in the game box, because they are all still out in the game area, this action may not be taken, and another action must be chosen. If the player is able to take this action, it will be played as follows. As mentioned, players will not know what cards they hold in their hand. So to discard a card, the player will either have to blindly pick one to discard, or have an idea of what the card is they are planning to get rid of, based on the information they gained from other players. After choosing a card to discard, the player will place it face up next to the deck in a discard pile. Then the player will take the top card from the deck and add it to their hand, without looking at it. Before using this action, or at any time during the game, players may look through the other cards in the discard pile to know what has already been discarded. This allows them to have a better idea of what cards they should and should not try to discard if possible. There are multiples of every value in the deck, except for the value 5. There is only 1 5 of each color, so discarding a 5 should typically be avoided. The final possible action a player can take during their turn is to play 1 card from their hand. If a player chooses this option, they will remove the card from their hand and place it face up in the playing area. To try to start a new firework, add to an existing firework, or complete an existing firework. Before moving on with how this action works, let's look at what fireworks are and how you build a firework in the game. A firework is a run of cards of the same color, always starting with 1 and counting up. A completed firework will have all cards from 1 to 5 in order and of a single color. There can be several fireworks being built at one time, but there can only be 1 firework of each color during the game. So a player could not play a second 1 of white to start a new white firework, because there is already a white one in play. Now that you have a better idea of what a firework is, let's get back into the action of playing a card. When a player plays a card, it is most likely because they have gained enough information about the cards in their hand to feel confident that they have a particular card. For example, I may have gained enough information from other players to feel confident that this card is a red 4. So I can take it from my hand and place it face up on the table. If it is a red 4, I can add it to the firework. It must be the next card in order to be placed. Let's look at another example. Let's say I was confident I had a green 1. There is not yet a green firework started, so if I was right that it was the green 1, I would start a new firework of that color. One final example to look at. Let's say I'm pretty sure I had a white 5. If I'm right and play it, I will have all 5 cards in the run of white cards. Therefore, the white firework is complete. When you complete a firework of a color, there is an additional bonus gained. You get to take a blue clock token from out of the box and add it back in the middle of the game area. If there are no clock tokens currently in the box, nothing is gained. The examples just given told what happened when you successfully place a card. But if you accidentally place the wrong card, there are consequences. Let's say that I had mistakenly thought I had a red 3, but I had accidentally grabbed the wrong card and played a green 5. There is no place to put that card, so the card will be discarded. As a penalty for playing the wrong card, the top token of the fuse tokens is removed from the game and placed in the game box. You don't want this to happen too often, because if you take the last token and reveal the explosion token, the game ends immediately. After the current player has finished taking their one action, which again they must take during their turn, the next player in a clockwise direction will take their turn and take their one action. The game of Hanabi plays out with each player taking one action until the end of the game is triggered. There are 3 ways to trigger the end. The game ends immediately if the third black fuse token is removed from the game. When the third fuse token is removed from the game, the explosion is exposed, and the game has been lost by all players. Another way the game can be ended is when the players make complete fireworks in all 5 of the colors, by playing the cards in order from 1 to 5. If the game ends this way, the players have achieved the highest possible score for the game. A final way the game can end is if a player draws the last card from the deck. When this happens, each player will take one final turn, including the player who drew the last card. However, since the deck is empty, players will not draw any cards during their last turn. Unless the game is deemed lost by exposing the explosion token, players will complete final scoring to see how they did with their fireworks show. To complete final scoring, players will add up the highest valued card from each of the colors of fireworks they have started. For example, in this situation, the highest red firework value is 3, the highest blue value is 5, the highest yellow value is 2, the highest white value is 5, and the highest green value is 1. These values would be added together to give the final score of 16 points. After finding out the score, look at the overall impression chart found in the rule book. Find the range that your score fits into to see how you did.